analysis. Call 867-1965. AA Lock, Dock, and Security, 219 Northwest 10th Street, 867-1965.
All right, thank you. 24 minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I promised this morning that we would debate the minimum wage issue, and this is the time when we're going to do it. Your call is important for this because I don't have a conclusion. And I would like you to speak to me and maybe to everybody else who is in my position and explain why we should or should not raise the minimum wage. Before we do that, let me tell you why I'm not sure. Because usually I'm a guy that's thought about things like, especially like minimum wage, something that's been in the news forever. Why would I not be sure? Well, here's why I'm not sure. Well, first of all, let me just say that when the president gives the State of the Union address next, is it Tuesday, Robin? It's
yes,
going to be next Tuesday?
the 28th.
I believe he'll probably bring it up again. And one of the things that makes me believe that is a couple of news items that make it seem as though those people who study this are confident that he will mention using executive action on minimum wage. Okay. Now here's my thought, and hopefully it explains why I am not sure about this. Ocala is the only small town I've ever lived in. And I lived in Ocala when it was even smaller than it is now. It's not the only town I've ever lived in, though. I've lived in New York and Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So I've lived in big cities, and I've lived in this small city. And with the exception of those places, I spent short periods of time, and that's pretty much the extent of it for me. In this small town, I am about to ruffle feathers with this statement, because I feel like when I was here as a younger man, trying to get work as a laborer, as opposed to a professional, I felt like I was up against a wall, which is why I went to L.A., by the way.
Yeah.
I felt like I was up against a wall, and there was a rumor going around that may have been not just a rumor, and here's where it ruffles feathers. There was this statement that the businesses have more or less bonded together to make sure that no other businesses come in and offer higher wages. Robin, you were here back then. Do you remember that talk?
Yeah.
Where you're not going to get a good job in Ocala because there's this good old boy attitude.
Oh, certainly.
Where they're all sticking together. And if somebody comes to town and whatever would have been the minimum wage in those days, and please forgive me, I don't remember what they were, but let's just say it was $3 an hour. I don't know what it was, but let's say it was $3.
Close.
If it was $3 an hour, if that was the minimum wage, then you can guarantee that's what you would make.
Yeah.
You would not make more in this town.
That's right.
Back then.
That's the truth.
And the explanation that was given to me, and you actually did payroll for Six Gun Territory.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to ask you what everybody made, but I mean, the minimum wage was the guiding force that kept the small town mentality from going even lower in wages.
It was.
So if you were, 18, 19, 20 years old and you didn't yet have an education that would get you a good job, you weren't able to enter into the professional realm yet, you were working as a laborer, and you wanted to get a job, whether it was driving a truck or working in a warehouse or a factory or whatever we had here back then, or picking watermelons or whatever, right?
Yeah, a lot of agriculture.
You would have the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
Simple as that. And the thinking was that it was being controlled by those people who decided, we're going to keep these people in check. If a company comes into town and they start saying, you know what, I want to bring my company to Ocala and I want to offer good wages because nobody else here is doing that. So I want to offer $7 an hour, which back then would have been $4 an hour over the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Just based on my discussion here. Keep in mind, I don't know the exact numbers. But that person would have been spoken to by the people who have already made a decision. Look, you can't do that. Yeah. If you start hiring people, if you've got an opening for 50 workers, and each of those 50 workers is going to make $4 an hour more than they're making now, you're going to cause our good workers to leave our employment, and it's going to be hard for us to do this.
Yeah.
So they would. And Robin, am I right?
Oh, sure you are.
Anybody who
You're
lived
right.
here back then knows it. Now, I don't know that it's still true. And again, I'm not really in the labor force anymore. Not in the way that I was then.
I think it has changed because Microdyne broke that barrier, and that's when the Committee of 100, that's who the good old boys were called, were sort of dissipating. So,
Okay.
yeah. So
Now, okay. So
it was that way back then.
So using that as an example is why I say there should be a minimum wage. Mm-hmm. That's why, because of the small town mentality that I remember from small town Ocala back then.
Yeah.
So therefore, if there wasn't a minimum wage back then, it would have been even worse for the laborers.
Yeah.
Now let's change to the big cities. In the big cities, it wasn't that way at all. In the big cities, capitalism ruled.
Yeah.
Even in wages. Because if you wanted the best workers, you offered a little bit more. Mm-hmm. You offered a little bit more.
Exactly.
That way, you get some people come applying at your job and, okay, I'm going to offer $10 an hour, even though the minimum wage is $3 an hour. Oh, my goodness, everybody's knocking down your door. And now you can say, you know what, I don't want you working here because you are not what I'm looking for. But, sir, I'd like you to work here.
Right.
So now they are offering, in a world where there's a minimum wage nationally or federally, whatever, that says $3 an hour, they're offering $10 an hour. And you have your $3 an hour jobs that exist simply because, they do.
Right.
And then you have the $10 an hour jobs that exist because they need to find the best worker. So in the big city where there was a larger population, and I'm not favoring one big city, it could have been Miami.
Yeah.
Could have been Nashville. It could have been, any big city, Chicago. Mm-hmm. Then I think having a minimum wage that goes up and up and up would be counterproductive because it would hurt the larger city populations.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't know how I feel about this, because we're talking about a federal change. Mm-hmm. Here's the statement from the president. It's very brief, and it's what he made last year. We would expect he'll probably make the same statement right now. And so here's what he said.
Let's declare that in the wealthiest nation on earth, no one who works full-time should have to live in poverty, and raise the federal minimum wage to $9 an hour.
Okay, so that was the president said, I guess it was last year, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's enter into this discussion, and thank you for calling. I see some people waiting, so just hang in there just a second. I got another couple of sound bites I want to play, and they're from Herman Cain. Herman Cain disagrees with the president. And so I say, I don't know, if I was in Congress or whatever, how would I vote? Mm-hmm. What would I say? Because I really see two different employment landscapes in this country. I see the rural landscape and I see the urban landscape. Mm-hmm. And I really think it's two different landscapes. But if you're going to make one decision for the whole country, then you've got to come to one decision. Yes, to raise the minimum wage, or no, to not. Here's what Herman Cain has to say about this, and he is thinking on a national level.
Here's where the president is dead wrong. If you were to force a minimum wage increase from $7.25 to $9, guess what? They'll still be living in poverty. Raising the minimum wage is not going to get anybody out of poverty.
All right, maybe not. But again, and I'm agreeing with him in the cities. I'm disagreeing with him in the rural areas, like here. Because while you could raise it from 7 to 9 here, guess what? If that person has a 40-hour week, that person is now making $80 a week more, right? Which is $320 a month more, which is probably rent.
Yeah.
Or at least half of rent.
Half of rent, yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, there's the argument that, no, Larry, you're wrong, because what will happen is that those people won't even have a job. They will be let go. And so here's another soundbite from Herman Cain.
Businesses have only one option when costs are forced on them, and that is to eventually pass it on to the consumer.
Exactly. And that's the point. Mm-hmm. Why does it not seem true in the cities? I don't know. Maybe because there are more professionals making more money. Mm-hmm. Maybe Ocala and small towns have their share of professionals, but not enough to really support that. I'm not really sure. And I'm telling you up front, I'm waiting for your thoughts on this so that you can convince me to decide one way or another on a national level. And here's the only last soundbite I have. This is again from Herman Cain.
Here's another thing that the president and his advisors are not taking into account. In some states, they are already above the minimum wage. The marketplace will determine what the wages should be. When I was at Godfather's Pizza, in some markets, we had to be above the minimum wage because of a shortage of workers. So allow the marketplace to do it.
And therefore, he is making my point. In some markets, it had to be higher. And so when it had to be higher in the private sector, in his business, he had to raise the wages. He couldn't be minimum wage because he wouldn't get the good workers.
Right.
Because in some markets, he's talking about the larger cities. That's what he's talking about.
And that's called the prevailing wage.
And in the
you're in
smaller
there.
market, the more rural areas, like where we are, you risk, and maybe not anymore, because I don't know. It sounds like you know, Robin. So maybe we're not that way anymore. Maybe that whole mentality's gone.
No, it's not.
But I think in the smaller markets where there can be a small group of businessmen who say, let's all agree to never pay more than blank, the blank is going to be filled in with the minimum wage.
Right.
I promise you, it'll be filled in with the minimum wage. So Herman Cain made the statement about the minimum wage being higher already in some states. Florida is one of those states. Right now, the minimum wage in Florida is $7.93. What is the minimum wage? You know, $7.25? $7.25 is the minimum wage. So $7.93 is what Florida has. The highest paying state is the state of Washington, which is paying $9.32.
Wow.
$9.32. I guess that's
minimum
the
wage.
state.
Yeah.
Oregon pays $9.10 an hour. California pays $9 an hour. I believe that's the state minimum. However, some of those cities, like San Francisco, I believe San Francisco is already up to $13 an hour in their minimum wage. And again, the bigger cities, once again, seem to be able to do this without necessarily having the negative impact that those who are opposed to the raising the minimum wage are trying to talk to us about.
Exactly.
There's a website called salary.com, and on salary.com they make a pretty good debate showing the pros and the cons of increasing the minimum wage. If you're ever interested, just go to salary.com and search for it on that site. Your calls are what I want right now. The number is 622-WOCA, 622-9622. I have my thoughts on the rural. I have my thoughts on the urban. They do not line up, and yet the president wants a federal across the board for all rural and urban.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? I mean, you want to convince me? I'm putting myself there so you can convince me, but it doesn't have to be me. It could be maybe your elected official who you need to be convincing one way or the other. All right, let's go to the phone, and thank you for being patient with me. You're on the air. Good morning.
Hey, Larry, it's Mark calling back.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, and Robin, I just wanted to say I support the president, but and what he's going to do, but I think there's some confusion on what the president is actually going to do, and to give an example of what I'm showing in what I'm talking about. If you look back at the Reagan administration, the air traffic controllers had an issue, and they went on strike, and the president said, "That's the FAA." And that's part of my chain of command. And so, as the president, I can take action concerning my chain of command. And Ronald Reagan, though I disagreed with what he did do, he took the action because legally he could. And what that did in the whenever that strike was, that was in the 90s, I think, or excuse me, whenever, when Reagan did that, they broke the air traffic controllers union essentially, and they brought in a lot of people from the armed forces to shore up civilian positions. But what that did is that showed the Chamber of Commerce nationally they could be way more aggressive in dealing with private unions as well as public unions. Now, what the president's proposing is not a retaliation for that 30 years later. What the president is doing, so the listeners will understand, is he is going to offer an increase in wages for federal employees. Now, the president has the authority to do that because essentially they're in his chain of command. Now, getting back to the minimum wage increase, that still would have to be approved by the United States Congress or the Senate, and then signing off by the president. And so politically, I don't know where it stands on that. I would imagine that the people with the letter R by their name would be opposed to increasing minimum wage. On a personal note, if you don't mind me saying, Larry, I have worked as a non-union worker right here in Marion County and in other parts of the United States, and I've worked as a union worker in different right here, by the way, and nationally. And I've given the non-union way of life a chance, and it was very predatory. And I was replaced by a handful of immigrant workers that were all paid less than I, but then it put me out of work because there were 6 people doing the work of one guy, and I lost my job, and they all made, their wages, and I didn't come in as an immigrant. That's just a personal observation. So the other thing is the price of milk and the price of gas have gone up, and the price of the workers has not gone up. And what drives up the price of the product is not the workers' wages, obviously, because the workers' wages, minimum wage in particular, has not really gone up in 20 years, just incrementally, a little tiny amount. So those are my observations. I don't think they could be denied mathematically. So if prices are going up anyway, and one final point, Australia's minimum wage at 16, you start out $9 an hour, and at 21, you're at 18 minimum wage. So look that up on the internet if anybody's.
Thank you for pointing that out. Well, and I've thought about that too. We don't have that in this country where your age determines your minimum wage. That's an interesting thought
too.
Kind
of a neat idea, though. It's an and it shows what it also does is we have a lot of older people in service economy now. And if we could get the older people out and let the young people get back on their feet by making a wage, whether they're 21 or 26 or 19, and let the older people get out of the way, you'll actually cause you'll spur the economy. So even Henry Ford realized after he fought the unions from taking Ford was he was the last person to get his car company organized. But Henry Ford came to the conclusion if I enough to buy my product, I can sell more product, not less.
All right,
it's just basic economics.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And again, trying to compare the phone lines are open, by the way. Trying to compare the urban employment landscape to the rural employment landscape is probably an important thing to look at. Mm-hmm. And I do think that the cities that we're talking about have recognized that, which is why you see the higher wages in the bigger cities.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go back to the phone. Good morning. You're on the air.
I wonder what the rents are like out in Portland and Washington State, and how much a cup of coffee is, and how much a bag of groceries is out there. Because an increase in the minimum wage is going to lead to higher inflation, which hits poor working people harder than it does the rich people, who can easily absorb that. And another problem with an increase in the minimum wage is going to cost people jobs, because the minimum wage is designed for people at the lowest skill level. And if it costs $2 or $3 more to hire that person, the employer isn't going to hire that young person that doesn't have any skills. They're going to do what the previous caller said. They're going to hire an older person who already has some experience. If they're going to have to pay that extra money, they might as well get somebody that already knows what they're doing and doesn't have to be trained. And politically speaking, the president is using this for 2 reasons. It'll be a bonus for his union buddies, because many union contracts are tied to the federal minimum wage. If the federal minimum wage goes up, the union wages automatically go up. And plus, it's a winning issue to beat over the heads of the Republicans, because if the Republicans don't support the increase in the minimum wage, they look like bad guys, in spite of the facts that I've mentioned that will be the detrimental effects of an increase in the minimum wage.
Okay. Now, let me just ask you something. If increasing the minimum wage is detrimental to the average worker, would reducing the minimum wage be beneficial?
Okay, reducing the minimum wage would lower prices, but I don't think it's politically palatable. I don't think people would stand for that.
I know it's not politically palatable. But logically, if we had a dictator, let's say, if he lowered the minimum wage, would it actually benefit the worker? mean, in the long run?
If you lowered the minimum wage, it would benefit everybody that's participating in the economy because prices would go down. Just like if you lowered taxes, or if the president passed a law which automatically lowered rents by 10%, or any other dictate from the top down that's going to lower the cost of doing business, it's going to inevitably be passed along to the customer.
You would hope, yeah, and I don't know if that's what we saw here in Ocala back in the 70s. We had very, very low wages, and I don't know that I saw that. But I do.
Well, the cost of living was certainly lower in Ocala back then than it was in Orlando or Miami or some other place like that.
Okay. All right. Good point. Thank you, Pete. Appreciate the call. All right. Let me go back to another phone call. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning, Larry, Robin. This minimum wage is basically attacking the middle class and more or less the general way of life of this country. And they're attacking it by doing away with the middle class who can't look at a $2 or $3 an hour increase if they get an increase in all. I mean, look what they wanted to give school teachers. $1,200 raise. What does that work out to over a year? And it's unbelievable. When you increase your middle, you're increasing you're hitting the middle class from the bottom going up, and the government is hitting us from the top going down, i.e. prior to passing of the Obama health care bill and its implementation, there were 20 million people without health insurance, and now you have over 38 million without health insurance because companies just weren't meeting Obama's criteria, so they had to drop people that had health care plans. So it's to me, it's just the absolute destruction of our sovereignty, our way of life, and an out-and-out effort to make everything so expensive that nobody can afford it. You can't go by what it is in Australia. Let's look at Australia's military. I think our Coast Guard has a larger naval force than their Navy, period. The Army, I don't think, could come up against anybody. Why? Because everybody's relying on the United States to pull their irons out of the fire.
That's true.
And yet we're paying for this. We're paying for the whole 9 yards. They just passed a $1.1 trillion spending bill, and what do you think that's going to do to everything when they increase the minimum wage? I mean, they're attacking us from both ends, from the top and the bottom. And I say they because I include the R's and I also include the D's. They're playing good cop, bad cop with this country and the American people and have been doing so for a very long time. And we need a third, maybe a fourth party 30 years ago. Because what's going on today is absolutely horrendous as far as our Constitution and our way of government is concerned and the way it was set up.
All right,
because it's definitely not that way now. And apparently anybody, bureaucrats, any kind of politicians can do what they want. Don't forget, they exempted themselves from an awful lot of regulations and health care bill, etc. So, it's what I think is best for you, not what's going to be best for me, though.
Yeah.
And that's how these people are working, and we got to take our country back. And increasing the minimum wage does nothing but bring up the minimum cost of everything that's going to maintain body and soul.
Okay, thank you, Sonny. Appreciate that. I'm going to squeeze in one more phone call, but I just wanted to just mention one thing from the Washington Post. The Washington Post reported on the 16th, which was like a week ago or so, that the president is indicating to give serious consideration to the executive action, as Mark said, designed to raise the minimum wage for employees of federal contractors. However, it wouldn't. Those who look at this say, and including Senator Bernie Sanders, by the way, whose quote I'm going to read to you in a second, that it would affect all minimum wages if the president does this, whether
Certainly.
you like it or not. If you like it, then you're glad about it. If you don't, you're not glad about it.
He can't just
There are pros and cons. It said, and asked what the cons might be. Sanders noted that it had all happened in a private meeting, and you have to wait until the State of the Union address on Tuesday. He said he believes that if they go forward with it, it will have, this is the senator speaking, that it will have a very significant positive impact on the debate to raise the minimum wage for all American workers to at least $10.10 an hour.
Wow.
So while it would be, as Mark said, for federal workers or federal contractors only, he feels like it would eventually trickle down. He feels it's a positive thing, although Pete's position, as well as Sonny's, as well as Herman Cain's, is that it would have a negative impact. Let me squeeze in this final phone call, and I appreciate you waiting and being patient with me. Good morning. You're on the air.
Okay, this is Dennis. I'll be brief.
Yeah.
The nice gentleman that said the old folks kind of need to step aside and let the young folks have all the jobs. We need to point out that us old folks, what's just happened because of the present administration to the cost of our health insurance, the cost of our deductibles, and almost no kick for our COLA, for our Social Security checks. A lot of them that would like to retire absolutely cannot.
That's right.
Good final point. Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you, Dennis. Appreciate that.
All right. Bye.
All right. Well, hopefully I made my point. Hopefully I made it clear why I haven't come to a conclusion nationally or federally. I do think the small towns who often have the good old boy mentality, and it doesn't have to be in the South, it could be anywhere, any small town anywhere.
Ocala still has it.
Okay, but you could say, okay, I can see that happening. I can see how you would have the servant mentality. We will have people working as servants and give them a stipend. You know, that's the way sometimes they think. And if they don't have Big Brother breathing down their throat or down their neck to make it a decent wage, then they won't. But in other places where there's more of a capitalistic situation among employers, employment, and a lot of times, and to Mark's side of this argument, the unions play a big role in this, and usually in the bigger cities.
Certainly.
And so, therefore, I don't know that you would need an increase in the minimum wage in those cities because there's enough of a capitalistic approach by the workers themselves. The workers are the commodity.
Yeah, there's already a prevailing wage in the big cities.
In those places.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm still not sure how I would vote for this on a national level, but it is something that's probably going to be spoken about more after Tuesday, after the president gives his State of the Union address, and I wanted to see if you could help me decide how I would vote. And I still don't know, but I appreciate the intelligent dialogue anyway. All right, we will take a little break, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to WOCA News Talk 1370, Ocala's source for what's happening in today's hottest, up-to-date news and topics.
Your home is safe, or is it? AA Lock, Dock, and Security. The name has been a staple in Ocala since 1985.